Welcome everyone to today's webinar and thank you for attending. My name is Mona Harrington and I am the Assistant Director of CISA's National Risk Management Center, as well as the Government Co-Chair of the Information and Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management, or ICT SCRM Task Force. Today's webinar will focus on the task force's recent publication titled Software Acquisition Guide for Government Enterprise Consumers, Software Assurance in the Cyber Supply Chain Risk Management, C-SCRM Lifecycle, or Software Acquisition Guide for short. For those of you who aren't familiar with the task force, it is a public-private partnership with 60 member organizations and nearly 300 participants from the U.S. government and communications and IT sectors. It is the primary mechanism for government and industry collaboration on issues and solutions related to enhancing the security and resilience of the ICT supply chain. The Software Acquisition Guide was published on August 1st, and the documents have since garnered significant attention from stakeholders since the release. The guide consolidates essential software assurance guidance and frameworks into a single document and includes an accompanying worksheet that assists procurement officials to ascertain critical information necessary to mitigate risks associated with third-party software. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the first webinar in the Enhancing Cyber Supply Chain Assurance Secure Software Acquisition Guide webinar series to discuss how the guide can help organizations increase supply chain resilience through software assurance. Today's panelists are part of the task force's software assurance working group, and they have worked tirelessly for over 24 months to develop this guide. Today's discussion will cover the software acquisition guide's purpose, how it relates to other federal guidance, and how it can be utilized by organizations to ensure their software is more secure, safe, and reliable. We'll also hear about the development process of the guide to include core focus areas where experts found gaps that needed to be mitigated, such as software assurance and cybersecurity transparency in the acquisition process, focusing primarily on the software lifecycle activities. Before I turn the webinar over to our moderator, I want to thank the government and private sector professionals who developed the software acquisition guide that we're discussing in this important webinar. The product is truly a testament of how the public and private sector can come together to develop incredible resources to reduce risk. This resource in particular plays a vital role in providing recommendations for acquisition personnel to engage appropriately and make risk-informed decisions in acquisition and procurement processes throughout the life cycle. Thank you all for attending. I am really looking forward to getting this discussion started. So I'll pass it over to Joe Jarzombek, who will be moderating today's discussion. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Director Harrington. First of all, I have to say thank you to NMRC because the National Risk Management Center provided extremely valuable resources in helping us get this done and, just to bring it out, get it published. So thank you very much for the team effort there. I had been serving on this. We got it started. I was on the ICT SCRM task force, and we started the software assurance working group with a need for driving this so that we get adoption of standards that are out there. I had been working in Synopsys. I retired, but this is kind of a passion area for me, so I've stayed on as a subject matter expert, and it's been a significant community effort. And by the way, by looking at everyone who's attending this, we have a broad mix of over 400 people coming in from government, from large system integrators, people who are basically acquiring software, bringing in as part of their solutions. And then we have just the smaller companies who are actually just delivering their software. So it's a good mix. And so it's valuable for you to understand, why is this relevant to you and how can it help you provide more transparency and understanding and reducing the risk for software in your enterprises. We're joined today with our panel. We have three individuals who have been involved with this in different ways. Tim Mackey is here He was serving as a co-chair when we were doing this, so helped leading that effort. I'm going to have each of the individuals introduce themselves. And we also have Kanitra Tyler with NASA. I'm going to have her introduce herself, and Laura Zyberek, who's a senior advisor with CISA and one of the key authors of Secure by Design and consequently Secure by Demand. So we'll start with each of our panelists of why is it that the software acquisition guide is important, and what is it? Why is it needed? I mean, as people will say, there's a lot of standards out there related to software. Why do we need the software acquisition guide? So I'll start with Tim. You are the co-chair of this. Again, introduce yourself and then kind of give your perspective of why the guide is important.
Sure thing, Joe. And thank you, Director Harrington, for the introduction as well. So my name is Tim Mackey. I'm with Black Duck Software. I have the quite short title of being Head of Software Supply Chain Risk Management. And the kind of perspective that I'm taking on a lot of the software assurance is both as a producer of software, but also as a provider of tooling that enables the identification of challenges, defects, weaknesses, whatever term you want to put on something that is behaving contrary to its design and intended purpose. And that's fundamentally what software assurance is all about. How do I go about ensuring that the thing that I'm actually operating is meeting the requirements that were set forth? And so what we effectively have is a set of responsibilities that are borne partly by the creators of the software, partly through procurement, partly through operation. So one of the key elements that we took to heart in the software acquisition guide development process was that we couldn't just talk about the responsibilities of a developer. That would be effectively reiterating what's inside NIST Special Publication 800-218, the SSDF. We couldn't just go and talk about software supply chains. We had to recognize that the lifespan and life cycle of the software was important, and that no one piece of guidance that already exists was going to cover what we wanted to be able to establish, a baseline for what it meant to create the software and operate it in an appropriate manner and verify that it can be patched and how it would be patched and how it would be deployed and so forth.
That's good. And we recognize that there are many software security related standards out there, but there's much federal guidance as well. And Kanitra, from your perspective, coming from NASA, why is the software acquisition guide important given the fact that there's a lot of federal guidance on what we should be doing in our supply chain as it relates to software?
Thanks, Joe, for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Director Harrington, for enabling this webinar series to take place and the participation of CISA and the NRMC in this effort and recognizing its importance. As Joe mentioned, I am Kenitra Tyler. I'm the ICT and C-SCRM Service Element Lead at NASA. And as we were navigating the process to develop this tool, I refer to it as your TurboTax of software acquisition. It is your easy button. Yes, there is guidance. If you take a look at Appendix C of the document, there are over 20 different documents to digest, some of them being requirements, such as the OMB memos, some being guidance, such as the NIST special publications, also the Enduring Security Framework, some sector-specific guidance around the energy sector, and let us not forget the CISA Secure Software Development Self-Attestation Form. But what this document does, we believe, is bring it all together to enable some of that ease of implementation. This is your proverbial crutch. It's a mechanism to help you identify where there may be shortfalls and where helping you to prioritize. So we really thought, again, by not creating something new, rather leveraging that which already existed in the form of both recommendations, guidance, and requirements, we could produce something that, again, would be that easy button, that TurboTax-like environment where if you say yes, it tells you, hey, don't worry about these other things. If you say no, it gives you an opportunity to delve deeper into the related task with that specific question to then help you prioritize where you can focus. I think all of us have limited resources. If there is someone out there with unlimited resources, please let us know. We've been looking for you forever. But this does really help you to prioritize, to make it easier to digest some of those requirements. And then if you look through other parts of the document and the appendices, there's also that mapping so that if you really need more information, you can go to NIST Special Publication 853 or 218 or 171 to make it a little more digestible. If you need some light reading, those documents are available, and that crosswalk is also available to you.
Well, thank you so much. Lauren, before I get to you, I want to make sure everybody's aware of where you can find this information. If you've not already downloaded the software acquisition guide, you simply have to go into your favorite search engine, put in software acquisition guide, and the first thing that's going to come up is the CISA page that has it. And on that page, it will be the software acquisition guide, the accompanying worksheet that allows you to fill out all that, as well as a fact sheet that goes through several frequently asked questions. And one of those questions is about what is software assurance? And I'm going to just read it. It actually comes out of NIST definition. It's the level of confidence that software functions as intended and is free of vulnerabilities, either intentionally or unintentionally designed or inserted as part of the software throughout the life cycle. So software assurance is not a one-time build and you're done. It is a life cycle perspective. As Tim said, it's not just what developers do, it's also on the acquisition side. Now, Lauren, from your perspective, because you spent a lot of effort on putting out Secure by Design, and you brought up Secure by Demand. In fact, the quote that comes out of Secure by Design, it says, just as we seek to create a pervasive Secure by Design philosophy within software manufacturers, we need to create a Secure by Demand culture with their customers. That was very telling. And that was before you came out with a Secure by Demand document. So give us your perspective about why this guide is important, as well as the Secure by Demand guidance that you've put out.
Definitely. All right. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, everyone, for having me. As mentioned, my name is Lauren Zabrick. I am a senior advisor within our cybersecurity division here at CISA. And among other things, I co-lead Secure by Design across the agency and in the country, I guess you can say. So you asked me a question like why Secure by Demand, but I want to take a step back and talk about why Secure by Design, where this all comes from. So for those on the call who may be just slightly familiar or maybe even unfamiliar with Secure by Design, this is a movement that we catalyzed at CISA back in April of 2023 with the publication of our first white paper on shifting the balance of risk. Now you can draw a straight line from Secure by Design all the way back to the National Cybersecurity Strategy released in the month prior. And in that strategy, it talked about shifting the responsibility of security from the end users, from the customers who are the most vulnerable and least equipped to really go up against the everyday cyber threats that we're facing between cyber criminals and nation state adversaries, things like that, and shifted back to the manufacturers who are those most resourced and well-positioned to actually prevent these things, these weaknesses from entering software and secure or scale security from there. And so what does that mean in practice? It really means the prevention of the introduction of well-known defects and misconfigurations. And let's also kind of turn to the economics of the situation. So we know in our Secure by Design team that this is as much of an economics issue as it is a technological issue, right? So software companies have been operating rationally in a misaligned market for decades. This market has prioritized speed to market and features over security. And so we think that by generating awareness and really trying to generate the demand signal for security, then we can shift the market. And so we're hoping that companies will then be responsive to that demand signal from their customers to really start building in security from the beginning. And so what our Secure by Demand guide does is equip customers of software, and this is outside of government, right? So we know that the software acquisition guide is really for enterprise customers of software in the federal government. This is for anyone to use, and it's meant to be very short, very concise, because we know that customers across the spectrum don't necessarily have, maybe the rigorous controls and processes as government do, or as government does. So it can really be used by anyone, and it provides the questions that customers can ask of their vendors, but also it really describes why those particular elements matter, right? Why does secure authentication matter? Why does working to eliminate entire classes of vulnerabilities matter? And again, having those questions that the customers can actually ask during procurement discussions, we think will help generate that demand signal.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. The demand signal is the key to that, because we can have all these standards out there, but if customers aren't asking for it, why should suppliers care? And it's about raising the bar so that everybody's doing that. You should be competing first on, have you met the requirements for secure software? And we start articulating, what do we mean by that? One of the things that's very common both within the Secure Acquisition Guide, but also the Secure by Demand guidance that's out there, is the call out for an SBOM. We also, in our acquisition guide, make sure that you have the secure software development attestation form as one of those key parts of it. So this is not going out and redoing things, but it's saying those are key elements to that. So part of the process for developing it, understanding who that audience is. Tim, I was going to first start with you. Is the whole process to develop the guide, it was evolving as guidance was evolving. We didn't even have the secure attestation form, but we knew it was coming. We also knew it was a subset of the NIST Secure Software Development Framework. So all these things were coming. We were developing this. SBOM was evolving out there. That was not part of the attestation form, but we knew it was very important. We basically understand that SBOM provides transparency. It doesn't mean your software is secure, but it gives you a level of transparency. So kind of give us some of your perspectives of who was brought in during this 2-year process and what was the thinking. I can share my perspective, but I'd like you to share yours.
Well, one of the things was I was brought in because you started this whole project, and then I came over to kind of spike the ball and get it in place. So the reality is that this is a cross-functional, no one perspective dominated document. We had dozens of government partners. We had briefings from state procurement teams as to what their perspective might be. We had multiple representatives from industry, myself included, all looking at how can we create a document that establishes a baseline for what acceptable might look like. Our starting point was, if you look at all of the RFPs and RFIs out in the world, they are very free form. They ask questions that are subject to an awful lot of interpretation. So being able to say, is this actually something that is acceptable or unacceptable becomes a challenge. There's a little bit of an emphasis on, well, I might want to produce this type of document as evidence versus that type of document as evidence. We decided to take a little bit of a simpler approach. We broke the life cycle of a piece of software down into 4 areas. There's the development side of the equation, the supply chain side of the equation, the deployment requirements, and ultimately operational requirements in the form of vulnerability management. We determined that those were effectively our 4 control groups. And that the baseline should be a really, really simple question. Are you doing, do you have, yes or no? And if you have yes, then that's fine. Evidence can come later. You are effectively saying we do something. Or maybe you don't. And then there's this whole series of tasks underneath, which might give you a hint as to what doing this actually looks like. But that's not sufficient. We overlaid on top of that a set of governance questions. There are 19 of them. And they were all focused again around a yes-no type answer, but all with an objective of giving you credit for something you're already doing. Do you have the self-attestation form for secure software development? Yes, I know that I have that. Okay, you answer yes. There's now a trickle down that says you're actually also effectively saying that you're doing these types of activities within the control groups. Do you have a FedRAMP moderate or higher? Awesome, you get credit for a whole series of activities. Do you have an open source governance program? Do you have an SBOM? These all flowed together to get a very clear picture of what's the actual software responsibility paradigm that exists within supplier A versus supplier B. So now you can baseline and compare. It did take 2 years to do this. We were developing this at a very diligent pace while the rest of the world was moving in interesting ways. So you even have questions around AI policy and process, because that's something that was part of the puzzle. We intentionally held back on releasing this until we knew what the attestation form would contain, because we wanted to give credit for the work that was being done. So long process, but very, very proud of the output.
And it was long because we had a lot of people reviewing it and providing comments. And so that was valuable. By the way, when he says you get credit for it, that means you answered yes, affirmatively respond to one of the governance questions, and you get to skip many questions. And that was the value of it. If you can actually go through the governance section, affirmatively respond without the need for a POAM, you're done. So it's people are doing a lot of the right things. We wanted to make it easier for them to be able to do that. Now, Kanitra, you're coming in from a government perspective as well. And so you were looking at it from a perspective of what needs to be included, but what are some of the things we don't need to do? Again, you could talk about what's the relationship of the other things that we were looking at.
Yes,
You were
sure,
involved
Joe.
with it.
I think one of the things that we definitely wanted to avoid was being too prescriptive or making this appear to be another requirement or a mandate, or putting in language that, was too hard to interpret. We, again, going back to that easy button, we tried to make it as easy as possible. Again, because there were things that were evolving, whether it was the attestation form, talking about SBOM and SBOM requirements. Tim and I just a few weeks ago came back from the SBOM-arama. So, some of these things are still evolving. So we try to keep pace with that. And leaving opportunity, I think, for us to continue to build upon this work product as new requirements, real requirements, we can then come in and provide that additional help, that additional insight. So again, I think the main thing was, not being overly prescriptive, not making this mandatory or perceived to be a requirement was definitely one of the considerations. But at the same time, also level setting, I think, from both a government perspective, a publisher perspective, a third party that may just be the deliverer of that software, that value-added reseller of that software. We are now level setting the expectation of what it means to say yes to a particular box on the attestation. We are level setting, how As it is stated, a federal agency may request additional information. Well, now we have a document that we can all go and point to from a government perspective. We can say, oh, well, we might want to ask this question. And from an industry perspective, they are looking at it and saying, hey, our government customer may come and ask us this question. So I think that is a major game changer when we can begin to level set expectations and manage them appropriately.
So no supplier should be surprised if the government asks a particular question because it's already been there. Everybody can see it in advance.
Unless it's their birthday.
Yeah, it's the key to understand is if for some reason a particular supplier cannot answer yes, they cannot be affirmative in saying we're doing those things. We're not saying you're not qualified to do this project or you can't get a contract. But it is saying that represents a risk exposure to the using enterprise. And the using enterprise needs to make a risk-informed decision based on what are they bringing in, either in terms of the products or the services that are offered by somebody. And Lauren, coming to you from the same perspective, Secure by Demand was about that. And what are some of the other things that Secured by Demand was looking for? And why is it important that we are demanding it, that we're asking it through our contracts?
It's a great question, Joe. So going back to, this economics issue, there's a really interesting book, if people want to pick it up. It's called Geekonomics, the real cost of insecure software by David Rice, and his entire book on really what insecure software is costing us across the country, right? Not just in government. And it talks a lot about this market and how it is misaligned. But I think, in really trying to, generate that demand signal, like we've looked across the ecosystem, trying to study it and understand where we can pull on certain levers to try to make change. So certainly we are working with software manufacturers, right? Providing guidance and, trying to motivate them. And, we just launched a pledge for software manufacturers back in May at RSA. At that time, we had 68 companies sign on. We're now, I think, just over 220, which is incredible. And they are committing to publicly demonstrating measurable progress in 7 different areas. And you'll see that there's a lot of similarity between those 7 areas and what's on the Secure by Demand documents, kind of like this analog to that. Because those are the things that we look at when we look across the threat landscape. This is what this was what is informing how we're approaching these, right? So again, very preventable defects, very preventable misconfigurations. And to fix this, we want to go again from the beginning, from that design stage. It has to be set by the business leaders to prioritize security as part of the development. And one of the things that we're trying to do here is to give customers more agency in these discussions, right? Because not only I think are they probably not aware of the way that these insecure technologies can really enable these attacks, but also that they can have agency in asking for more secure products. My colleague Bob Lord always likes to say, we don't need more security products, we need more secure products, right? And so we're really trying to drive that awareness and also give people that agency, especially I think in a domain where there's kind of an asymmetry of information, right? And that sort of creates this lopsided negotiation, I think you can say. And so the more people are aware and educated, then I think the better we'll be.
Absolutely. Now, we've been talking about the things that are all coming out from guidance that we've got. And one of the things, and Kenitra mentioned that early on to us when we were getting ready for this, all the federal agencies are ramping up for basically requesting the secure software self-attestation form. That's kind of on everybody's radar list. Suppliers to the federal government are very much aware of it. They're working that. So Tim, could you give us your perspective on the relationship with that self-attestation form and why the software acquisition guide actually adds additional value?
So the easy answer is that the self-attestation form looks primarily at development practices, not the act of owning, the act of deployment, visibility into the supply chain itself. The form produces a very nice baseline for what development would look like, but it's not necessarily reflective of what that total ownership picture might be. So if you consider, for example, the review of software that's deeper within the supply chain for issues, okay, we can see some provenance references within the attestation form, but how do I actually assess whether or not that constituent component is appropriate or fit to purpose for this particular application, this particular mission element? That's not the role of the attestation form. It's a necessary component, which is why it's part of our first governance question. And if you answer yes to it, you do get credit for quite a bit of existing work, but not all of it.
That's right. By the way, if for those of you who are more interested in what is the relationship and why we have all of these, the self-attestation form is only a subset of the secure software development framework. And even that's a subset of the other things. For instance, even that's not requiring SBOM. We have a handy dandy little Venn diagram in the software, in the acquisition guide fact sheet. So you could look at the relationships with that. It was basically viewed as each of these things are necessary, but by themselves not sufficient. So we're bringing together to give you a more sufficient view of what is your risk exposure if certain things are not being done. And so Kanitra, from your perspective, could you identify how the guide addresses existing gaps or strengthens the case with evidence and how federal agencies could be using this?
Yeah, I think Tim made a very good point. You can answer yes on the attestation form, or actually there is no yes, no option. You're just signing, and we are, stepping out on faith to accept that attestation or that self-representation that you have met all of those things, or you are being absolutely forthright and open self-attesting again that you have a weakness in a particular area. I think that puts both the government as well as that software producer at risk. We talk about the False Claims Act. Well, the software acquisition guide, if you're answering yes, although as Tim mentioned, there's that trickle down, yes, you're getting credit, but we hope that it is being read, all of those things that by saying yes, these are the things that you are attesting to. So I think it gives that software publisher some protection. It gives the government that level of assurance that they've said yes here. So we can expect that these are the things that have been implemented. Also, as Tim mentioned, it starts to drive across the development life cycle, or the software life cycle. And again, strengthening that case for assurance in that life cycle overall, and not just the secure software development practices, which is what the attestation is focused on. And then finally, it starts to drive again and level set those expectations. I've said yes to this. Here is what I can expect. The government will come and ask for evidence. Oh, you said you're doing this. Here are some of those tasks that would be associated with that. And surely those tasks are producing some form of evidence that you would be able to submit from a publisher perspective. And then again, the government being consistent. I think, again, that is one of the key elements. We're driving consistency. We're managing expectations, and we're not increasing the cycles or level of effort on either our software publisher, industry partner, or government both from a user perspective and our acquisition professionals, we're not asking them to go out and get a software certification to understand how to acquire or how to use this software securely. Rather, they are getting that assurance by some of the evidence and the responses to the questions that they're seeing in the guide. I would go so far as to say that it is highly recommended, especially for NASA, when we are communicating, saying, hey, it might be a good idea to take a look at the software acquisition guide, and hey, you might want to upload that as an artifact associated with your software records and your attestations in RSAA. So again, it's beginning to take care of the entire village. We're not just doing it for a single agency, but by having it in RSAA, having these artifacts associated with it, everyone, it's not a one and done deal, but we're doing it once and we're all getting that level of understanding. And then if needed, that agency can go back and ask for additional information based upon the level of assurance that they need for their enterprise.
Absolutely. Provides a way of saying, I can identify Delta questions, I can do that. Now, I'm going to keep with you, Kenitra. From a government perspective, we know that in order to communicate this to potential suppliers, it's going to be coming from the acquisition and procurement community, via contracts, via the RFPs, RFIs that come out. But really, they're not the security experts. It's the CISO, the CIOs, who are the enterprise risk owners. How does this guide help provide some communication between those who are in acquisition procurement with those who are the real risk owners?
Yeah, I love the fact that one, it is written from an enterprise perspective, whether you are the small mom and pop or you are the huge software publisher or reseller. It can be broken down, specifically looking at Appendix E. You can tailor those conversations to your audience, where they are in the life cycle, helping our acquisition professionals understand you don't need to be a software developer. You don't need to be the CIO, but these are some of the things that you do need to know. They don't have to go off and create their own checklist. So I think it enables those enterprise conversations that again can be tailored based upon the level of assurance that you need for your overall enterprise. I know that this has already been communicated and distilled by our small business partners that are participants of the task force. And, we got great feedback, again, because we stayed away from being prescriptive, we made it tailorable, and it is broken down based upon the segments, if you will, of the overall life cycle to ensure that assurance. So I think it's really enabling those conversations to happen, making it tailorable to your audience, decreasing, this new certification or this new training that you may need to go out and get. It's very simplistic. It is that easy button, regardless of the slice of the pie or the role that you play in this overall village of your enterprise.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And there's already been a note in the chat that we had a few questions asked, and there's also people are saying, reminding you that if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We plan on taking questions afterwards here, so continue with that. So Lauren and Tim, I want to ask you what's next? We even realized that when we were doing the software acquisition guide that there's more that can be done. And oh, by the way, the FAR guidance has not come out yet. So we're waiting for that to come out, and that's going to happen. But also we suspect that, Secure by Demand is going to have more explicit guidance. And by the way, I have to commend you because you actually explicitly called out, do you look at CWEs, the common weakness enumeration, which are the root causes of what ultimately become common vulnerabilities. So good on you for doing that. So what's your two perspectives about what's next? Because just because this guidance has come out, we're not done. Tim?
So the easy, obvious answer is there's no FAR language yet. 14028 said, hey, we should have FAR language. And that'll come out in due course, but that may change some of what we have within the acquisition guide at this point. one of the key elements that we had during development, and to Kenitra's point about consumability, whenever we had a question, whether it was a control group question, a governance question, or even a simple task, the core team mantra was, can I answer this? If I'm a CISO, if I'm a large organization, if I'm from a prime, if I'm in the government itself, if I'm a small business, can I answer this question? Does it make sense to me? We've put a lot of energy into that. So being able to go and say, when the FAR language comes out and it's been codified, we can go and provide an update. We do intend to have an update at that point. But the world isn't stopping while the FAR language is being worked on. The future includes some AI stuff being added in, because AI is now a very hot topic, and being able to have appropriate controls around its use is a topic that we should be tackling.
And that's a good point with that. And by the way, for those of you who, I'm sure if you're on this, you understand that, but FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It is the law. So when that language comes out, they're updating the law. It says you have to do this. And you can fail to put any mention of it on contract, but it's kind of like one of those things, you still have to do it. So Lauren, what's your perspective about what you're doing next with both secure by design, secure by demand? What's happening from your guidance perspective?
Yeah, well, from a secure by demand perspective, we're going to be, continuing to beat the drum on this, but also looking more at the operational technology, or OT, side of the house. So I'll tease a little bit. We have a document that's going to address secure by demand for OT specifically. That should be coming out, I don't know, pretty soon. I'd say in the next couple months, I'm not exactly sure. And then also, if people saw the latest from the White House on securing the green energy transition, right, we're going to be really trying to focus in that area as well, with manufacturers, integrators, customers, project managers, et cetera. But from a broader perspective, I'm really glad that you highlighted our inclusion of CWEs, or the common weakness enumerations, really the root causes, right? And that's what I was referring to earlier about the most preventable, the most well-known and preventable classes of defect or coding error. And so, really wanted to reiterate the role of insecure technology in the pandemic, if you will, of cyber attacks that we're experiencing. I think that there is, this ongoing perception that it's completely the fault of the victims, right? And if you saw Director Easterly's most recent keynote at MWise a couple of weeks ago, and they just posted it, she talks about the 4 V's and how we exclusively focus on the villains and the victims, but we never focus on the vendors or, of course, the visionaries who are, have been extolling, the need for security in products for decades. And so we're really going to continue to drive awareness there and try to shift that, the responsibility of the security from customers to manufacturers, really drive that norm, really drive the need for CVE, or vulnerability transparency, and also to make sure that when those records are being submitted, that they're not only timely, but they are accurate and they are complete, so that we can have a better understanding of the weaknesses that are out there. I'll just sort of leave you with this analogy. Think about our automobile safety, right? Back from just say the 50s on through now, and how the study of crashes and that database has really yielded, much better understanding of how the crashes happen, but also how we can prevent them at scale and how we can save lives. And that's what we were trying to do with especially on the CWE side. So Certainly more to come. Please visit CISA.gov/secure by design. We're always putting stuff out, from guidance to alerts and things like that, white papers, blogs. So a lot to come there.
I appreciate that. I'm also involved in another standards group on SAE G32 that deals with cyber physical system security. And our focus has been all these cyber exploits are now having physical consequences.
Absolutely.
And the consequences are getting now life-threatening, not just inconvenient because you took down some critical infrastructure. So it's important that we focus on that. Now, I'm going to remind everybody, we do have another webinar coming up on November 14th. It's going to be from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. And that's where we're going to get more into the how do you use this document, the worksheets that are there, both from an acquisition perspective, but also as a supplier, how that could help inform your decision making. And in terms of what you're doing internally within your organizations. Now, we, again, encouraging people to ask questions here so that we can wrap up and doing it. We'll try to take everyone's. There was a question, came from Anil, it says, is there an intent to stand up an attested software portal for agencies to use, much like the FedRAMP marketplace? Well, the answer is yes. Kanitra, you talked about that with the RSSA. Could you talk to that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I'll say that RSAA is the repository, as its name states, a repository for software attestations and artifacts. As far as attested, that gives me a little pause, because that would suggest that there is some verification of the attestations happening. The FedRAMP marketplace, they have been through that third-party assessment and received that authorization. That is not happening today. However, if I could predict the future, I would say that we can expect that there will be some verification and validation of those attestations forthcoming, to make everyone's efforts, one, valuable, and to ensure that we are driving that security and that level of assurance that then leads to our resilience.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here that says evidence may not be required until all of a sudden there's a breach and your software was part of it. Maybe you ought to show us the evidence. You were saying that it was secure.
Or Joe, at least look at how you would prepare that evidence and build the process before you need it.
Good point. Just because somebody ultimately probably going to ask, especially those who are in high assurance environments. Another question came from Stephen asking, what if it is the government that is developing the software for other agencies or government entities? Kanitra, does NASA use software developed by other agencies? And what do you do about that?
So that is one of the, I'll start off by saying that I believe that everyone should be drinking the same Kool-Aid. If you are developing software, a secure software development practice should be applied to everyone. The government, we should drink the same Kool-Aid that we are expecting our industry partners and software publishers to drink. So today it is out of scope when developed by or on behalf of the government. It is up to that agency CIO to determine whether or not they are going to require an attestation. Again, if I were that fortune teller, I'm almost willing to put some money on this, that while it may not be a requirement or may not be in scope today, it is certainly something that we can look forward to in the future, and I think we should. Again, if we're level setting expectations, we should level set how the game is being played by all players on the field.
Okay. Warren, would you want to add any perspectives on that as far as the government's development of software, or how could we do better internally?
Well, certainly, I mean, Kanutra's right. Having the same principles that we are abiding in the development of secure software. So the principles of secure by design are, taking accountability or taking responsibility for customer security outcomes. So knowing that, the use of your technology could cause harm and working to reduce or prevent that, radical accountability and transparency, and then leading from the top. So, and then of course, using different frameworks and other sort of technical guidance to drive your secure development lifecycle. But yeah, I would agree with Kenitra that we have to be operating on the same playing field.
That's great. We had another question that came in from Lawrence. It says, as a French company, I'm wondering if you are intending to promote your software acquisition guide as an international level. It deserves it. Comments from any of you?
So I would say thank you, and I agree, it does deserve it. We're still early in the process of promoting the acquisition guide, but there is nothing in it that inherently precludes it from being used by an international community. There are some references to US government programs or concepts like FedRAMP, but for practical purposes, the bulk of this is applicable to pretty much any type of software that's being developed anywhere for any use. And in fact, I would go as a call to action for people between now and the next webinar. If you were to take the guide and focus solely on the governance questions, take that to your CISO, your CIO, your CTO, your head of development, and say, could we answer these 19 questions? Just a very simple, could we answer these if somebody asked us? How hard would it be for us to answer? That's a fantastic first step in applying what we have in the guide.
And by the way, one of the individuals who are on this, Dick Brooks, was also on our development activities with this. And as a small, medium enterprise, as a software development house, he went through the effort and timed it. How much time did it take him to do this? And we've also done the estimate with larger companies. So if you go to the fact sheet at the bottom, it actually tells you how long should it take you to go through this. And that in itself is telling, because if you're going through this and seeing a question and you're going, what does that mean? That should be concerning. If you as a supplier do not produce an SBOM, that should be concerning, because how do you manage your risk, even internally, if you don't know what you have? But from a governance perspective, those who are using it, SBOMs are important. Now, we did have another question that came in where they said, is there efforts to encourage ongoing automated evaluation of third-party components? And how will consumers continue to validate the software components are still secure post-acquisition? I have an answer for that, but I'm going to go to any of you first. Tim or Lauren or Kenitra, if you want to answer that, because I certainly have an opinion on that. Then I'll tell you. The efforts right now, you're very familiar with the software bill of materials. And that is one of the ways for people to do software composition analysis, to say what's in this code. You should be even doing that for your own intellectual property, but it's widely available for open source components, of which even proprietary software today has up to 80% open source software in it. So you can do a scan to understand what's in there. Now, the question was, what happens after I've acquired it? SBOMs are not static. The intent is every time software is updated, you should be updating your software bill of materials. This is just goes as part of your development activities. It should be available to your customers as well. Because why? When a new threat occurs, people will say, this is what it's attacking. The first thing you ought to be asking, does this affect me? Well, how do you know? If you throughout your enterprise, unless you have SBOMs for your assets, and that will tell you, go look here. That's the first thing you've got to be able to do. So SBOMs are very important from a user side, but they're also very important from a supplier's perspective of understanding what third-party components you've brought in to do that. Tim, you want to add to that, or Lauren or Kenitra?
Yeah, I'll just add that we, in our Secure by Demand guide, have noted that this is for pre-procurement post-procurement, right, for to continue to ask those questions. And then actually soon we're going to be coming out with some further guidance on deployment as well. So keep an eye out for that.
Okay. Again, I thank everyone for attending today. It's to us, this has been a labor of love because we think it's been very important to basically allow the consumer side to start taking control of it, to understand that they're not a victim. They can actually do something by creating the demand signal. And with that, I'll wrap up and turn back to Director Harrington for any closing remarks or what she might have.
Joe, thank you so much for engaging us in such an informative and lively discussion about the software acquisition guide. Just a really huge thank you to Tim, Kenitra, and Lauren for all their hard work in leading this effort. I know that I learned a lot just listening to this webinar. There was a lot of useful information from our conversation today. I really hope that the audience did too. It is so exciting to see how this guide serves as a valuable starting point for discussions with cybersecurity staff, enterprise risk owners, CIOs, CISOs, as it really does aim to facilitate more informed risk-based decisions regarding the acquisitions and procurement of software and, of course, cyber products more broadly. Again, thank you everybody for attending. As a reminder and a plug, which has already been mentioned, and I'll mention it one more time, the second webinar in the Enhancing Cyber Supply Chain Assurance Secure Software Acquisition Guide webinar series is going to be held November 14th from 1 to 2. So if you haven't registered already, please register through the link provided in the chat. And I really do, of course, always encourage you to visit the task force's website to learn more about the software acquisition guide, as well as all the other resources that we have out there that truly is caters to assist with enhancing the supply chain and resilience. And I encourage you to take the quick survey on the site to provide us with feedback. We always want to do better. Thank you so much for your time.